Oh, look at that. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Tuesday, February 4th, 2025, the House Transportation Committee getting back to work after floor and caucus. And we have a little bit of quick change to the agenda up first. Right from the top, CFO of the agency is joining us, as well as Chief Engineer. And I'll let you guys introduce yourself and head us right into the first topic this morning.
Thank you.
This afternoon. There we go. This afternoon.
Yes. Thank you. For the record, Candace Almquist, Chief Financial Officer.
Jeremy Reed, Chief Engineer.
And we have a short presentation for you today, just 7 slides, I think, following up from discussion last week where I had offered to come in and walk through basically how we started the FY26 budget process and why the administration is proposing the use of what's known as the JTOC appropriation, the appropriation that has historically gone to the state police for the use of the Agency of Transportation this morning. But this can be interactive, and feel free to interrupt me at any time. This is for you all. So if you want to ask me a different question than what I'm saying, then please jump in. Oh, and I was going to say that some of these slides are a little in the weeds, starting with this very first slide. So again, please let me know if you have questions, but I will walk through this in detail. So what we're looking at here on this very first slide is the Transportation Fund operating statement, 2 columns where we ended FY24 and then where we left last session for FY25 as passed. Highlighted 3 cells here that were concerning when we started the FY26 budget process. These 3 cells equate to one-time revenue. So the first cell is what we anticipated would be for reimbursement from FHWA for administrative costs related to the July 23 flood. When we left last session, this estimate of reimbursement was $8.5 million. The next slide, I'm going to tell you that has changed. But just when we left last session, it was $8.5 million, one-time revenue, not to be repeated. The next highlighted cell there, the 12.5, again, to get to balance over here, this $1 ending balance, it required 12.5. It required that the agency find $12.5 million worth of reversions at closeout. So in July 24, we are required by the Department of Finance and Management and Financial Operations to find $12.5 million that would have otherwise carried forward into 25. And we consider reversions a one-time revenue source because theoretically we passed our 24 budget based on needs and available revenue. And we wouldn't like to take any reversions between what was passed, because if we had available money to be carried forward, then it would be just expenses that were pushed into the next fiscal year. And then the last number that I've highlighted here is the 24.8. That is a combination of 3 different numbers, and the one that I'm interested in is $25 million. You might remember that last year there was a $25 million transfer from the cash fund, which is the capital investment fund, to the transportation fund to support the AOT base budget. And the reason why that 24.8 million number isn't an exact 25 is because there are some other fund transfers in there. We transfer $316,000 to the debt fund, and we receive $140,000 from the motorboat regulatory fund. So just know that it's $25 million. That's a one-time revenue source. Last year in the base budget language transferred $25 million from the cash fund for capital and essential investments to the transportation fund. So starting 26, just taking those 3 cells into consideration, $46 million hole.
Was that 25 million? Can you remind me? Was that for the computer system? What did they give us that money for?
No, that was not the computer system. This was for IAJ state map.
Oh, for some reason I thought it was
Well,
or something.
Go ahead. I'm
So
sorry.
the T fund was underfunded for a little bit, and that was an attempt to bring it back up. And there aren't any of those funds this year, except you're gonna talk about J-Tox.
There actually was a $12.5 million waterfall appropriation. And I will talk about how we propose to use that in addition to JTOP this year, Representative. Questions on the 46 million at this point?
So you guys are all following that better than I am? So there you go.
Okay. I'm just gonna do a quick slide on 25. So again, remember when we left the session, the expected reimbursement from FHWA for admin expenses related to the July 23 FHWA eligible projects was 8.5 million. We then learned through continued negotiations with FHWA and refinement of the cost pool, which is basically the expenditures that we are submitting to FHWA, that expected reimbursement had dropped to 6.3 million. So already for FY25 current year, we had a $2.3 million hole that we needed to fill. Luckily, we had a bit of a revenue upgrade from July. That was 2.1 million. However, that also included the new revenue source, the BEV incentives and the PHEV incentives. So when you take that 2.1 minus the 600,000 that we anticipated from the new revenue source, that's plus 1.5 million. Over here, I know I might be going too fast, but basically these bullet points tell you where we started in FY25 versus where we are right now. So we're talking about $1.5 million worth of new revenue against a $2.3 million hole because of negotiations with FHWA. The other changes in FY25 were that last year's T-bill, Section 6, did say that the Secretary of Transportation could backfill appropriation cuts taken during the session to, I believe it was maintenance and central garage to the tune of 3.26 million. So we were able to backfill those reduced appropriations through found carry forward. So the impact of those four items was a net $1.1 million hole. And I know that this is seeming like, oh, $1.1 million for the whole T fund, but I thought it was important for you to know that even just starting in the current year, we had a problem to solve, even though we had a revenue upgrade. So the solution that AOT came up with was, okay, we're going to commit to finding $1.1 million worth of reversions in July 25. So already you'll see on the T fund operating statement, if Logan walks you through it, AOT is committed to finding $1.1 million of reversions, and that's for current year. Not even talking about 26 yet.
Can you
Yes.
just trying to wrap my head, can you just restate of why we got all the deficit?
For 25.
For 25, so we had to make some, that was through the feds or?
For 25, it was a reduced expected reimbursement from FHWA. It was.
Oh, for that 8.5 that we're anticipating, it was lower, okay.
Yes.
Gotcha. I just did it to some place, and I guess I just had one, well, I don't know sure if you're gonna get to this, but it has to do with the carry forwards and reversions that are in our white book.
Yes.
For the maintenance program, you reverted 2.1 roughly.
Yes.
Why was that?
That was to partially fund the 3.26 that the secretary was trying to find for the T-bill Section 6 appropriations. That was on this slide here when it says carry forward appropriations from 24, 3 million. And then we executed contingent appropriations to backfill the 3.26 million that were cut last session. So finding reversions and maintenance of 2.1 helped go towards executing those contingent appropriations. If not for the cut from last legislative session, I don't think we would have been taking as big a reversion from maintenance this past year.
All right, I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess it's, I beholder, one would think reversions, as you said, is money that's not gonna be utilized.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, Representative.
Please keep going.
So will there be, expected reimbursements this year for the admin stuff that happened this year for the flooding? And, how are you estimating it this time around?
Yeah, so we do expect that FHWA will go through a negotiation process with us once again for administrative costs related to the July 24 flood. We have a very high level estimate right now, too high for me to feel comfortable putting on the operating statement. I think one of the issues last session between why it dropped from 8.5 to 6.3 is that number of 8.5. We were just too early in the negotiation process with FHWA. So I do have a number. It's significantly smaller than that. And we really need to refine. And it is my hope that that refinement concludes by May. And once we have a number to count on, I also wouldn't want it to go towards balancing our T-fund operating statement. My hope is that going forward, we can try to the greatest extent possible to allow one-time revenue be one-time revenue on the bottom line and not help us get to balance.
So in the risk of being in this spot and new to this spot is an easy place for me to hide. And as a citizen legislator, $858 million budget, $336 million in state T funds, flat in revenue, but we saw an increase in unexpected revenue. And that's not even enough to fill the holes of where we're at. That, you see, we have an increase in revenue is what I was told on the board, the emergency board piece. It says
Yes.
transportation revenues are, and we are looking at reversions from unspent projects that were committed that aren't happening at the time. We're pulling that reversion money back to use it to fund the spot. We're benefiting from an increased revenue higher than we had expected. And we are touching transportation dollars in maintenance and in other pieces to pull out just to get to true to 25, let alone into 26. That doesn't sound like a very positive financial picture that we're that much into a piece here and a piece here and a piece here by project. That sounds to me like an awful lot of accounting work to try to get to a spot where we're not in a particularly great spot going into the 2026 budget. And maybe that's just my amateur view on it, but it kind of makes me nervous about what I'm hearing. And maybe I'm not hearing it correctly, but I'd love to hear it in a layman's terms of when we're at a spot in that much money of a budget, trying to pick pieces from other places. That doesn't sound like a very positive, just to get trued up to where we were in 25 and to head into 26. But maybe I'm misunderstanding it as a bit of a rookie.
I wouldn't use your words, Representative, but what I'd say, I wouldn't say it's not positive, but what I'd say is I definitely had my work cut out for me. I started my position just this past May 2024. And coming in, looking at the operating statement with the one-time polls that we looked at the past screen, $40 million. I mean, I looked at that operating statement and said, oh my. So this presentation is really to educate you all on the process that I went through and we as an agency went through in creating our 26 budget.
It was very challenging, is what I hear you're saying. And
It was done.
I'm just a little bit more new than you. So I appreciate all of that, a hard spot to step into. Representative Pouch?
Yeah, thanks for doing this. I think it does show how close we are. And in previous years, we've pulled money from other funds to keep this going. I took a lot of hit for raising DMV fees. But I think it's fair to say, if those weren't in the budget this year, we would be in a much bigger hole. And those funds would need to be, either the budget would be much smaller, or you'd be pulling funds from other sources. I guess that's a statement, I guess.
Thank you, Representative.
The only thing too, would also be helpful is, your predecessor Bradley, and it might have been, Logan too, is we did like a gap analysis up 5 years out to, just to give a picture of our match money to the federal dollars and the pressures that we have. And I want to say it was like in the out years, it was 60-80 million dollars we were short. Do you have an updated version of that? And I think that'd probably go to the chair's point. That's gonna paint a picture that is not too rosy by any means.
We do have an updated version of that spreadsheet and we can get that to you.
That would be great.
I would, if I could, Jeremy Reed, Chief Engineer, I would just offer that there are a lot of estimates that go into that because we don't know what reauthorization looks like at the federal
Oh,
level.
yeah,
Right, so the match estimates are just that. They're, who knows what Washington's gonna do.
but it's an eye opener.
But we also, whether they're estimates or not, that's what we would want to be prepared for.
Correct.
To continue our plan of maximizing every federal dollar that's available, correct? And we got $12 million from the general fund last year. Was it?
It was 25
Yeah.
last.
So half, yeah.
I recall it the 60 million for 3 years is what was asked or something to that effect at one point. And now, and we ended up with I'm sorry,
25
25.
for 2 years.
Is that what I?
It was 25 last year and 12.5 this year.
Okay.
That'll be coming up.
The governor had a different version. He wanted to give us all the money from the general fund, and we didn't go along with that, and there was a compromise. And we split it up, but yeah.
But that doesn't change the overall picture of what you're.
No, it does not change the
Of
overall.
where we were,
Yeah.
where we're headed for
Correct, correct.
leveraging maximum
Yeah, yeah.
dollars. I am sorry that I took you down a rabbit hole.
Oh, you're
Where we're going next.
So back
Unless
to
there's more questions.
26. Oh, yes. Question.
Unless there's any more, so, thank you.
Okay. All right, so remember our $46 million. Then when creating the 26 budget, we look at pressures that are known. The first pressure that's known is salaries for our state of Vermont employees. That's according to the collective bargaining agreement that the state of Vermont negotiates with the union. And the increase to salaries for this year is 6.4%. Then we look at the benefit increase. The benefit increase this year, which was given to us by Finance and Management, is 16%. The increase to retirement benefits for our state employees is 7%, again, given to us by Finance and Management. Then we have the costs for internal service funds and the service level agreement. Internal service funds are given to us by Finance and Management. Service level agreements numbers are given to us by ADS. Average 4% increase for those two items. And then we have our own central garage internal service fund where we pay ourselves. We pay the fleet for our equipment, and we can expect a 3 to 4% increase for those billings as well. So just taking those 4 known pressure items, which are highlighted in that salmon color at the top, that's $15.5 million worth of pressure starting out the gate. So if you add that to the 46 million, we were starting with, at a high level, $61.5 million to be found for FY26. You can see here, this is a summarized version of our position. If you compare our appropriations from last year to our appropriations this year in the T fund, you'll notice that we're only $4 million more than our request from last year. And that is less than a 1.5% increase over last year. That's taking into account everything that I just said. So you could say, how are we only 1.5% higher than last year with all of the pressures that I just outlined? And it is because our FY26 proposal contains $14 million worth of reductions.
Which are all listed in there.
Which are listed within the division budgets. We can also provide you with the crosswalk spreadsheet, which details those reductions, depth ID by depth ID. But the last slide has a summary at a high level of the different reduction proposals. And the biggest one is modification to the highways projects.
So, James, where is the one pager that tells me how much less work is being done on our infrastructure as a result of all of that? What does that translate to what our people are going to see out there on the road when they start digging when the weather turns, what impacts that? How do I know what doesn't get done that we wanted to get done?
I defer to Jeremy, Chief Engineer.
Yeah, so the budget on a page, I think, is in the white book, that you can see each individual program. You know, we were in last week and just pulling this from memory, but you know, I think the paving program, as an example, went from 130-ish, let's say, to 102. Right now, let's just say it's 130, right? That 28 million doesn't equate to T fund. There's a multiplier there, right? So I don't know what the exact T fund difference is. What you will see and what we'll present later on is that project impacts are really limited to projects that have a T fund match. So mostly our bridges are getting their match funds from the TIB fund. So it really narrows the type of projects that we can delay to achieve the savings within the T fund.
Representative Burke?
Was there any pushback on the use of the JTOC appropriation?
Well, we'll get to that. Yeah. I mean, and I think one of the intents of this presentation is to demonstrate what that would look like if the JTOC, sort of us keeping that, doesn't come to fruition.
So to your point, Representative, the next slide talks about. Question?
I was just gonna say in the budget though now, despite reductions and moving projects around, is it fair to say we're still maximizing IIJA funds that are there, so we're not leaving
Absolutely.
things on the
Yeah.
table?
Yes.
Is that true across all the sort of transportation sectors, whether it's highway structures, like pad grants, municipality sort of structures?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we are absolutely not sending or refusing any federal monies because of match pressures.
Okay, thanks.
So this slide, I think, is the most important of the deck. How we found this $61.5 million. Again, that's a combination of the 46 million one-time revenue problem that we had when we started, plus the 15.5 of known pressures. So we have the upgrade from the January 25 consensus revenue forecast that gave us 10.3 million more in T fund over FY25 as passed. You can see here, this is why we propose another ongoing revenue source, the use of the JTOC appropriation and the appropriation that has historically gone to the state police. That would give us 20.25 towards our $61.5 million. We also are relying on a one-time revenue source, which is that 12.5 that we talked about earlier, which would be a transfer from the cash fund to the T fund, understanding that that's a one-time revenue source that would not be available for 27 potentially. Then we have the $14 million worth of reduction proposals that I talked about on the previous slide. And in order to round us out to 61.5, you will see on the T fund operating statement that we are relying on $4.5 million worth of reversions to be found in July 25. That 4.5 additive to the 1.1 that I talked about on the earlier slide to solve the FY25 problem is around $5.5 million worth of reversions to be found in July 25. That's a much more sustainable number for the agency to find on an annual basis than the 12.5 we were forced to find this past July.
So just a question on the JTOC appropriation. Is that what the governor was referring to in his budget address last week? That we would
Yes.
no longer be contributing
So-
that amount?
Yeah, so the services that the state police are doing on patrolling the highways would continue. They would just be funded via general fund. And the governor's does propose doing that on an ongoing basis so that those services would no longer be funded with transportation funds.
Yeah, so I understand you're saying that the $4.5 million is a much more reasonable amount to expect annually out of unspent reversions that you can bring back and whatnot versus. So 4.5 million out of a 320 million each year is likely to be unspent or in some way, or maybe that's not the right term. That
I'd
would be
say
like,
more reasonable than 12.5. It still requires me to talk with all of the division directors and ensure that we're going to actually have unspent funds at the end of the year.
we don't want to build the budget thinking that every year, do we?
I mean,
I'd like to
ideally,
think that ideally we could get all the projects done, right?
ideally, if I had my way, I'd love to build a budget with $0 worth of anticipated reversions, but we just weren't able to make that happen this year.
I'm just looking at it from whether we should be counting on it going forward or not, or I guess that's what part of what you're saying, but thank you.
I'd say, yes. I'd say, let's see how it goes this year, and then we can come back next year and tell you like the pain level that we have.
Okay, go ahead.
I just have a question regarding the cuts at the Department of Motor Vehicles. Do you feel like some of those cuts are justifiable given the new software program that you all are kind of finishing up implementing? Has that been able to save some jobs and make that a little less painful?
Yes, my understanding is that the reductions at the DMV are primarily the limited service positions. And those positions either already or will be vacant at the time that they would be eliminated. And DMV did put those on the table. So that's good news.
Did you see that in the black book or did you?
I
Where'd you
think I
pick
saw
up on
it on a slide. I was
on the slide?
really scrutinizing Candace's slides.
Right up there. Part
Probably
of,
much more than I was. I thought you were like, oh, you already delved into the black book.
part of this slide deck contains the elimination of 7 limited term service positions. Most at DMV, 1 at FNA and 2 at FNA and 1 at highways. But again, all of those positions either are already vacant or will be vacant at the time of the elimination. So this slide here is our attempt at showing you the history of the JTOC, but we defer to Legislative Council, of course, if you're interested in understanding the history, behind why the appropriation exists and how it came to be. Where we are currently is that it's an appropriation to the state police for $20.25 million. And again, as you saw in the previous slide, we would propose that appropriation be general funds, and that this section of statute be struck, and that is included within the governor's recommended budget.
What's the date on there the last time it was touched or made any changes?
The last time it was touched was 2022, but that didn't change the amount. The last time the amount changed was 2012. It changed from 25.25 to a cascading sequence down to 20.25.
Thank you.
Yes, no problem. And we do have we're very interested in the legislature allowing us to move forward with using the funds that would have historically gone to the JTOC. So we do have a slide on what the impact to our budget would be if the legislature were to not go that way, were to continue to fund the JTOC with transportation funds. And this is what Jeremy is here to discuss.
So this does not reach the $20 million goal, but it takes a pretty big chunk out of it at a little over 12 million. Because as we discussed earlier, the TIB fund is principally funding our bridges. So what we have on the table for actual project delays to reach the 20 million is limited to largely paving projects. When you strip out all the bridges, all the emergency relief projects, anything that's 100% federal, and anything that's currently under contract for construction, essentially, this is the list that's left. I will say that the first two projects there, we are now under contract with. And all the projects going down the list, up to and including the Essex Fairfax project, we hope to have under contract by the end of March. So we need to, just to get contractors on board and get them moving in the right direction, need to have contracts executed this spring. So the current bid ad schedule would be to have active contracts for those projects. The Killington Stockbridge project is later in the year. That's a really big reclamation project. So we do have some time before that will be under contract. The district leveling is state fund only that we try to pave and identify in the spring for the worst of the worst. And a recent example of that would be Montpelier to Waterbury northbound on I-89, right? It was in really, really bad shape. And we did basically a Band-Aid fix out there. Recognizing the reduction in the paving program as a whole, we have allocated more money to DLIV, just anticipating that need. But again, those projects aren't identified until later in the spring. So in theory, there could be some district leveling projects on the table. Similarly, Pittsford Grandin is out of the roadway program and isn't expected to have a contractor on board until later in the fall. So that is a viable project. If for whatever reason the 20.25 is not supported and we do have to make these cuts, because we will have contractors on board, we will need to negotiate some sort of remedy for either delayed construction costs or to terminate the contract. And so we would effectively be paying something without any meaningful construction activities occurring. And that's just the place we're in.
So where do you go to make up the other 8?
If the committee needed us to find $8 million, we would need to come back. And that would be a much more substantial look at cutting whole programs.
Yeah, well, I think for the sake of making the argument, we would need that. I mean, the corporations is gonna need that. I mean, there's rumblings that, they got major concerns about giving us that money. So we need to make a case on your behalf, and I think our behalf, to keep this transfer, we need to have a whole picture. They need to know. And what those penalties might be, because it sounds like the bulk of these things that you put forward are gonna be under contract anyways. So, I don't know if you have past examples, what they look like, when something gets canceled. I know the Cirque Highway up in Burlington, I mean, they had, shovels in the ground, they got canceled. I don't know what we had to pay out to them, but maybe that's something that you can look at.
It's very project specific based on what the contractor has done from the time we've awarded the contract to the time that we put them on notice that we're either suspending work on the contract or terminating it. If compelled by the legislature to take that course of action, we would have to have an internal discussion as far as, is it better to suspend the work or to terminate it? We could take a very, very high level guess at what those sort of penalties or incurred costs would be. I would also add that we would have to understand whether or not those costs would even be eligible for federal participation. So if the project was a typical 82 to 18% funding split, what might be a fairly small T fund hit could have a 5 times multiplier there. And again, some of that could be project specific at the time based on the ruling made by the division office. So there'd be a fair bit of variability in that.
Representative Keeling?
So what I hear you saying is that if they're to the vice chair's point, if we decide that we want to find another some amount of money, every one of those rescissions or reductions would be in existing programs that are under contract or working. And in fact, we would pay penalties for getting nothing done.
For the 12.5 million that we've identified, they would, I mean, depending on when the decision is made, but like I said, we probably won't know by end of March. Everything but the Killington Stockbridge project, the DLEV project, and the Pittsford Brandon project. So I'm trying to think what that looks like. That's 7 million or so, 6.5 million. Those will all be under contract, and yes, there will be some costs incurred to delay those projects or terminate them.
Jeremy, I'm also saying that if we wanted you to find that additional amount of money,
Correct.
it would come out of existing shovels in the ground projects or contracted projects. Something would be sticky. You couldn't just say it's done and we'll go for another year.
I think it would be premature to assign those, but in all likelihood, they wouldn't all come from the highway division. So I think, you know, all other divisions would be on the hook for something, whether it be DMV, maintenance, F&A, or policy and planning. So what the breadth of a true $20 million key fund savings looks like would be beyond something we could testify to today, but it would touch all components of the agency.
So what we're saying is we would really reduce it, and the phrase that comes to mind is not exactly right, but cut to the bone. And frankly, it would handicap our ability to provide services to the population. Thank you.
Representative White?
I'm just wondering if your agency could come up with a timeline, looking at these projects, you know, when you expect to be in discussions with your vendors, when you probably know when you're going to need to award them, but, you know, officially award them the contract.
Yep.
So that they can start to plan. So would you be able to provide us with a rough timeline of how you're planning those decisions out, so we could have that information and share it with appropriations?
Yeah, I mean, I can share that today, basically. I can go project by project, but I think the sort of summation of it is all those projects I identified above the page, or above Essex Fairfax, will be under contract by the end of March. And so ultimately, at that point, if the sort of theme and tenor of the legislature is to not support retaining the JTOC transfer, we would have to sort of look to the administration and look at sort of the tea leaves of the legislature to decide how seriously and how quickly to order either termination or suspension of work. But I think at this current rate, just to maintain the viability of those projects, we're going forward. Right? We can't advertise this many paving projects in May and expect them to get done. And so we are, I think, in the position right now of executing the governor's recommended budget.
So like right now, are you advertising for request for proposal for these? So that's kind of where you, or do they all kind of go concurrently, or are you going one by one?
So I can just quickly go through the list, but the top two projects are under contract currently. Chelsea, Washington, we advertised on January 15th, so I would expect a contract be executed by the end of February. Heinsberg, South Burlington, we plan to advertise February 5th. Sheldon, Enosburg, Thetford, Fairleigh, we anticipate advertising February 12th. Berry City and the 3 Brattleboro projects, we anticipate advertising February 19th. And the Essex Fairfax, again on February 19th. So generally speaking, 3-week advertisement period. And then there's, we've got 30 days in which we have to award the project by or not. So really you're talking end of March at the latest.
Representative Well?
Where is the money to finance the operations of JTOP going to come if we take this away?
We're grateful to the administration that they have found an equivalent amount of general funds ongoing to support the work that state police is currently doing. So the work doesn't change, but it is an impact to the general fund rather than our transportation fund.
Great, thank you.
We are time-wise, this is our last.
This is the last slide.
What we're saying though, or what I'm understanding, you're saying that anything that happens in that $20 million, it's got to come out of the book. You're saying that all the other areas, or we primarily look at the book, but other areas, I guess, would also be potentially impacted.
We'd have to come back to you if you needed an additional $8 million to get to the 20.25. Like Jeremy said, it would likely not all be coming out of highways. We would need to take a more agency-wide approach on all programs.
And that's also, I guess, for Jeremy, that you ever walk back from things like this, the relationship with the limited amount of contractors that we have, that's for another time, but this has significant impact on our ability for relationship and future work, I would suspect.
Absolutely, and you know, I mean, there's a credibility piece, and you know, I would just offer that the 12.5 million we've identified savings, as we progress down the line and execute those contracts, those savings actually get less because we're going to have to potentially pay contractors for the work they've done after we've awarded, which then actually, again, depending on how drastic it is, puts more projects on the table. So we discussed $102 million paving program down from $140 million peak. This what I'll call a contingency plan essentially is contemplating a $65 to $67 million paving program compared to where it was 3 years ago.
I guess additionally along our lines, isn't just the T-fund line that we're talking about. The overall spend within the state economy and the work of those people is substantially more, which I guess would reference the other two columns.
Yeah, because the federal funds, right, to reference the earlier point, the federal funds are then not going out either. So, you know, the $12.5 million savings represents $4 million in total contract expenditures.
We're a little bit behind schedule, but any more questions?
Just a clarification, that 12.5 from this come from the capital, was that agreed upon, or is that something the governor has recommended too?
That is contingent upon language in the governor's recommended language document. The 12.5 is already reserved in the cash fund for that purpose. That was a part of the budget bill last year.
So we have some language specifying that they're gonna keep it, it's okay.
Right, so
That's
it's.
not new, because I'm getting worried with that.
No, no, it's,
Very defensive with that fund.
It's
Okay.
sitting in the cash fund reserved for
Yeah.
AOT's use for
Right.
IIJ state match need.
Okay.
And then this year's GovRec language says we want to unreserve and we want to transfer it to T fund.
A little bit of a shame, but, good that it was undertaken.
Our last question.
Last question.
Well, Representative Lally was in there if she wanted it, or
Oh,
to go to.
yeah, I was just wondering if it strikes me that if you defer cancel paving projects, you are also in the long run adding to the costs of those projects as well. There's going to be more significant projects, presumably more wear and tear, et cetera. Is there just like a sort of spitball, just a number that you guys might work with in your heads about like how much, what the opportunity cost of that?
Sure. I guess the closest approximation, so a lot of this work, if you look at the project list, are FPAs and certainly the Brattleboro class ones. Those scopes of work probably won't change. Okay, so the treatment won't change just because of a 1 year delay. In inflation, and I might put Logan on the spot here, but if we just sort of look at the producer price index, I don't know where it is today, 3%. So, I think it would be fair to say that the producer price index is a fair approximation of where construction costs will be in a year. So I'll look at a 3%
Okay,
crystal ball.
okay, thanks.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Two questions. I think we mentioned it before. If there were tariffs on Canadian goods, that would probably impact some of your projects, I assume, particularly those toward the border.
I don't know how much material we get from Canada. What I would say I'm aware of, and certainly not getting into global trade, but I think a fair bit of our gas and diesel comes through the Port of Montreal. As far as raw products, because of Buy America and sort of just the level of availability for aggregates and things like that. Right now, that's probably not our biggest risk.
Okay. And one last, it's kind of a question. I guess I'm asking questions or making statements. We know our transportation budgets, won't be solved by this. It's just another incremental help. What do you have your eyes on for the next couple of years?
Well, we know. Yes, great. We know that starting 27, we already have a hole because this construct relies on the $12.5 million transfer from the cash fund to the transportation fund. So starting in 27, I will be sitting here and telling you, how we figured out the $12.5 million hole. In addition to 12.5, I'd additionally say that we should add $5 million to that because we're relying on $4.5 million worth of reversions. And while that is a more sustainable practice to find $4.5 million at the end of the year than 12.5, again, like I said earlier, I ideally would like to find none. If I come back here next year and say I had to rely on $4.5 million again, then okay, and I'll tell you how it went this July. But just at a high level, 12.5 plus a $5 million starting with 17.5. And that can be seen in the spreadsheet that Representative Corcoran was talking about that we can have an update for this year.
Okay, well, we're way over, but we have some built-in time this afternoon. We'll probably shrink the break a little bit and cut into our committee discussion time. Candace, Jaron, thank you very much. Appreciate it. We're going to transition over to one of the budget presentation pieces. I believe Amy is more than ready to go. We followed up her whole afternoon. The staff will be waiting for you patiently when you get back. Or impatiently.
For you. That's okay.
No cord today?
No, not allowed to plug in anymore.
I'm not on the Zoom, so.
Need to get us.
Oh, yeah.
If you have your email, you'll see that I just sent you over the link so you can connect and share.
Thank you. I didn't get the memo for anybody.
I failed to mention for our retired representative from Brandon. That he wouldn't have liked that slide very much.
Yeah, I noticed that. I was gonna
I bet he's
say,
probably watching. I'm gonna get a text or an email here pretty soon.
I was gonna say that, it looked like, geez, these projects have spread around to the committee members. But the one for Butch could probably take it up.
Right, if it's good, if it's for Butch's area,
Yeah.
but we'll,
It's,
yeah. That's not. How much does these mics pick up as you whisper?
Well, we'll find out. Start getting calls here.
Yeah. I get more calls. We have most everybody here while we, wait for all to come in. For those returning members. Sad news that our chair that sat in this spot for 2 years, before us, her mother passed away.
Oh.
Yes. That's one of the big reasons that she didn't, anyway, I won't get into this, not my business to say. but it's a sad day for those of you who know Sarah. It would be a great day to reach out to her,
Yeah.
or tomorrow, or the next week, or whatever. So would also be a great opportunity to, until Amy's ready to, we do have a new committee assistant. Cameron Griffin has joined us and will be with us, I hope, for the rest of the session.
Yes.
Fellow UVM grad and from Connecticut, and we're excited to have her on board. And please make a chance to introduce yourself. And she wants to know how many pages you want and any other particular pieces, and probably get a chance to get to know each of you as we spend a lot of time in here over the next few months. And Molly, or Representative Burke, thank goodness, she's been reminding me to introduce Cameron to the group. So it looks like Amy's also got back up and is up and running, and we can move on to our next piece. But I just used that quick second to introduce our UVM alum and Connecticut native and new committee assistant for the rest of the term.
Welcome. Are you from Connecticut originally?
No. I'm a Vermonter, born and raised. But I was required to leave to go get a job and, you know, survive and then be allowed to come back. Right?
Yeah, you got this job.
Wonders never cease. Amy, please, I'm sorry to hold you up as long as I have.
Good afternoon. I'm Amy Bell. I'm the Bureau Director for the Policy Planning and Research Bureau at B-Trans, which is part of Policy Planning and Intermodal Development Division. So just to get our lay of the land, I only have 5 slides again, just as I did a couple weeks ago when I was here. To start out with, just want to give you a sense of like what does our division look like? And I think the most important thing, give you some highlights of what's in our budget. Most important thing to note is that policy planning and research is the lower portion of this. You'll see my name in the sort of kind of army greenish brown box there in the middle. Everything down below is my portion of the bureau, but I also carry in our budget all of the administrative costs of the policy planning and intermodal development division. So that's all of the front office staff and administrative support staff. So we basically carry the entire division's operational costs. So, you know, our division's portion of our rent and those sorts of things are all accrued in our budget. When I was here last time, I used the analogy that what do we do in policy and planning? We are the incubator of ideas in the agency. We take all the ideas that you folks share, things that come down from the federal level. We're the ones that convene the internal groups and have discussions about how do we implement this new innovation or this new idea in the context of the state. So that's what we do. We're comprised of 5 different sections. The research section, policy and planning, development review and permitting services, mapping, and then federal policy are the sections that are actually in the Policy Planning and Research Bureau. You'll notice I mentioned those administrative costs. Our public outreach section is up there, as is our state policy. That's Patrick Murphy, whom I think you all have been introduced to, as he will be spending a lot of time visiting with you over the time. And then Michelle's position, as well as our assistant director and support staff. So that's the lay of the land. And then as far as our budget is concerned, it's policy planning and research budget is $15.04 million. And I'd like to just sort of set the stage so you understand where our money comes from and then where it goes to with this particular slide. And then we'll drill down into more specifics as we go. But the funding profile, you can see that the vast majority of our funding is from federal sources. It's about 70% from federal sources. So we're not big users of the transportation fund, although we do get some funds from the transportation fund. We also get a contribution of local. That's the local portion that is paid towards many of the programs we oversee. And we get a very small interdepartmental transfer from from the Agency of Natural Resources and the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. Our funding comes from basically 3 primary sources.
Sorry.
Representative.
Just a question on the funding, you know,
Sure.
paying federal money. So is it an example of, I do GIS mapping, I'm working on this project, I'm all done. It took X amount of hours. Is the federal government paying that 80% of that?
In the vast majority, within our mapping section, yes, all of what they do in mapping is 80% federal and then 20% state.
Okay, thanks. So I was just trying to figure out where the federal money.
Yep. And then I mentioned the spending profile, how we spend it, and you can see how it breaks out. We have The vast majority goes to personal services, grants, and those are grants out to the regional planning commissions primarily. You'll see that vast majority of them go there. And then the operating costs that I mentioned earlier on. And then as it breaks out by section, you can see the various sections. I mentioned the general administration for our division, and then policy planning, and all the other groups. But I think the most important sort of highlight of this slide is that there's actually about 61% of our funding, which is pass-through funding, or is mandatory. We don't have a choice. We have to, based on federal guidelines, dedicate a portion of our work towards planning activities. We've got mandatory federal requirements. And then we also have a mandatory requirement that we spend a portion of our funds on research. And then again, the other portion is this fairly sizable pass-through to the Metropolitan Planning Organization that's on there. And then the RPC TPI grants, that's enshrined in state statute that we will have this cooperative relationship with them. So again, those are funds, like, as I said, 61% of our budget is actually mandatory or required by statute. So. And then how it breaks out dollar wise, and you can see from last year till this year how things have changed within the section. I think the most important sort of highlight to point out here is I mentioned the MPO pass-through. You'll see it's a sizable increase this year. And you may recall last time I was here, I mentioned that the MPO is a direct recipient of federal funds. So they actually get them directly from Federal Highway. They are administered through VTrans. However, we do not have the authority to do anything with those funds. They're their funds for them to decide how they use. And if they don't use all their funds in a given year, those funds roll over to the following year. So it's really a unique situation. So we don't know how much money they think they're going to use or budget in a given year. So we have to take whatever number they have, incorporate it into our budget. And this coming year, they happen to be planning on using a little over $540,000 worth of additional federal funding. So, and then, as I mentioned, the
Can you remind me what MPO means?
Metropolitan Planning Organization, and we have one in the state, and it's in Chittenden County. And it's a special federal designation that allows them greater authority over transportation funding and planning in the designated areas. And then the other most important thing on here, you can see we've got a sizable increase in the general administration, and that's primarily just the operating and overhead costs of the agency are greater than they were. And we also have one new position in our admin, and that is Patrick Murphy's position is now up in the administrative budget side of it. So that's sort of what's causing the pivot there. And then you'll see the reductions are primarily just positions, and we've had a fair amount of staff turnover. So we've got cheaper staff. We've had older staff leaving, and we have newbies coming in, and they're much cheaper. So
Less expensive.
Wow.
yes, exactly.
That seems interesting. It said something about newbie. I don't know. But Representative Thompson, you have a question?
Oh, thanks. It was
Actually, that was a
actually
setup for you, I
It was
guess.
on that topic. Yeah. So just to clarify then on
Sure.
public outreach, that's as a result of change in staff, or was there any
Sure.
overall decrease in
So
staff
we-
capacity?
Yeah, we had two positions in the public outreach section, and that was reduced down to one. So Amy Tapco is now the lone person who oversees public outreach.
Okay, so it wasn't just new people coming in, it was also a decrease.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Representative Keys.
So I'm trying to understand the MPO. So that goes to one organization?
It does.
Okay.
Chittenden
And-
County Regional Planning Commission.
Okay, the Regional Planning Commission. Is that, how much is their budget? Do you know?
I believe their budget is around $10 million. I
So.
was just reading their minutes.
So the federal, this is a federal grant or monies.
Federal award, yep.
Yeah, and there's no state monies in this.
There are state monies in this, but the vast majority of it, we only pay 10% of a portion of the funds that they allocate.
So the federal government pays basically half the Regional Planning Commission. Thank you.
Representative Burke.
Well, maybe this, I don't know if this is a question for you or not, but regarding the MPO and their budget, how much do they contribute to the Green Mountain Transit, you know? Or is that, maybe that's a public.
So there's a portion of CCRPC's budget, which is pass-through dollars from the Federal Transit Administration. I think it's around $400,000 a year. That is the planning funds that go to GMT to support their activities. And again, it's another one of the mandatory pots of monies.
But they can't use the regular appropriation for transit. Can.
No, it's not for service provision, it's for planning activities. These activities all have to be planning eligible, so it can't be buying buses and, drivers and those sorts of things. These are planning funds which have very specific eligibility requirements.
Awesome. Representative Cox?
Yeah, and so just to clarify, I can talk about Heinsberg. We have the planning commission, RPC, comes in and, we think, hey, we need a sidewalk section. They'll come in, give us a proposal to plan it all out. So
The
that it
MPO?
becomes, yes, so that'll be shovel ready. We'll have to put some money into it, but they use their funds to do that. Anytime we have transportation questions, we look to them to help us. They do a lot of that. Otherwise, you couldn't get projects done unless they're properly planned.
So MPO works on behalf of the entire state?
No, just with the Chittenden County,
Chittenden.
County towns, yeah.
If we want to, I'm sorry, I interrupted. If we want to hear more about that, then we can. But this, unfortunately, for what I would consider this particular section, you're not the person to answer those pieces. You're handling the budget pass-through portion, but you're not running that group.
No, but I interact with them regularly, so I know a lot about it.
And you can answer the questions, but we're not going
Right.
That's fine.
right now. We're
Wherever
not,
you want to go.
you can answer them if you'd like, but we're not going this way right now. We're going this way. So Representative Lally.
Real quick question. What is the relationship of the VPSP2 program to the MPO, and is there a relationship?
No, the VPSP2, which is our project prioritization process, is statewide, and all of the regional planning commissions participate. So you're treated exactly the same.
Thank you.
Representative Parker.
Just one question, Amy. Maybe you can just clarify, I know the answer, but why is there only one NPO in the state of Vermont population?
So it's a federal designation, and you have to meet special requirements, including population density being the primary one. So that is why Chittenden County. There are other parts of the state that conceivably might in the near future meet the eligibility. For example, the Upper Valley area, Hartford, Norwich area it's been estimated that they, along with some of the towns directly on the New Hampshire side, at some point could reach a density that could qualify them to be an MPO, and it's based on the most recent census, and they did not reach that threshold this past census.
Representative Howe.
Is the project to look at the Vermont state standards, the road standards, is that coming out of your group? Or are you
We have one of the staff people who's helping to advance that project in the agency is in our section, yes.
just a staff person, it's not being driven?
No, it's being actually paid for through the highways side of the organization.
Thank you.
And this is my last slide, so after this, we're done. So I just want to give you a sense of how does our funding, how has it fluctuated over the years? And you can get a sense. On the top is the total amount of funding, so that includes federal, state, and local. And then the bottom part, you can see the state funds only, along with the current proposed amount. And I would be neglectful if I didn't mention why in 23 do we have this big jump in funds, and that's because that's one of the first years of the EV incentive dollars came through, and the legislature decided it should go in the policy and planning division's budget under this line item, and so that's why it's there. But then you could see we went right back down the following years. That's it for me. Do you have any questions? Additional questions? There's my contact information, and don't hesitate to reach out.
Anybody else? Well, thank you very much, Amy. We
You're very
much
welcome.
appreciate it, and our apologies for holding you a little later than
Don't worry.
getting started. So,
Thanks for your time.
thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to sort of move into another area that we maybe haven't spent a lot of time in or whatnot, and then we'll try to use a little bit more as we go through in committee. We had three discussion timeframes on our calendar for this week. There are three topics that I guess I want to make sure that everybody in the committee gets a chance to be heard on. The three of them are that the biggest topic in the building, according to the speaker in the chair's meeting that I attend, is of course education reform and property tax relief, property tax perhaps reform and education. And I've been asked, every chair has been asked to make sure that if there is a role in any way that a committee can play in that discussion, that we find a way to be active and involved in that. So what I'm going to be looking for in this particular first brainstorming discussion, and we'll get to the other two that we're going to do, but I know there's ideas out there and there's pieces, but we have to find a way that our committee will spend time and effort in contributing to the overall education reform, how it relates to transportation specifically, what can the transportation committee may or may not want more information on, may or may not want to be able to perhaps pursue some testimony, pursue some information from our JFO office or from our ledge council or from witnesses that's related to transportation. We're going to come back to that in a second. Later on today or this week, you'll also see committee discussion after sort of town highways and infrastructure pieces that are presented. Tomorrow, there's a committee discussion piece. I have heard from a number of members, it's a shorter section, but a number of members about how we will or won't find ways to help our towns that are dealing with all the huge amount of issues related to floods or events and weather-related activities and some of the big issues that happened in the last couple of summers to them and how the work that needs to be done there. We're going to hear more about that, but we're going to make sure that people get a chance to talk about what, in effect, what revenue issues, what we're facing, what the towns are facing, some discussion in that area. And the third area, like this last budget section, there are a couple more pieces of the budget that need to be presented from the agency. And what I'm looking for in that third piece of discussion is what area of that $858 million budget do you or any of you want to dig further into? What areas do you have a particular interest or area that you think warrants further investigation or review by the committee? So I'm really looking to do something a little bit in the perspective to make sure that you have the opportunity, not just outside the room as we chat, but inside the room to say, I want to dig into this $858 million budget. I want to know X, Y, Z, or I'm interested in this. Or whatnot. So that's the second one. The first is regarding the education activity and everything that might be transportation related. The second is what I meant to be second was what part of this $900 million budget or $858 million budget do we need to hear more about, dig into, go further on. We'll head next week towards T-bill language and whatnot. We'll start to hear from what the language requests are, but there is $858 million there that we may or may want to learn more about. And the third piece is the interest that I've heard within the committee that talks about this huge revenue picture, what we are or aren't not going to do about it. That was a pretty, again, sobering testimony this morning or this afternoon about the situation, what we are not willing to do short-term, long-term, and particularly it's scheduled after the town piece because there's been a lot of discussion about town revenue. So there's three committee discussion pieces in there. Those are the things I'm looking to hear about. I don't know if today I'm particularly throwing the transportation education reform piece up without a ton of warning. We can delve into any of the three a little bit as need be, but we have not used discussion historically, so we're going to use it a little bit more than we have. We're okay to go back and forth across the table, but not in a way that is questioning anybody's particular opinion about it. It's more about what is the issue, what information would we need, where are we at? This isn't the place where we're going to right this minute that we're going to convince anybody what they should or shouldn't believe. We're talking about what we think we need to dig further into. So as an example, for this one in particular, does anybody have any questions about the idea of three different topics, three different discussions? You understand what I'm asking you to think about? For the education related piece, obviously everybody sees the big yellow school bus. That's the easiest thing to see of what transportation is related to buses. Representative Pouch is going to help me out here in a minute, but There's also, from what I gather, a huge amount of secondary trips that go on, not just picking them up in the morning and bringing them to school and then picking them up in the afternoon and delivering them, but apparently all day long, we are driving students to and from technical schools, secondary support type schools that are used in education where students don't attend their main school, that we haul people to and from extracurricular activities. We haul them to and from all kinds of field trips. We have regularly scheduled, sounds amazing like our public transit situation. We have regularly scheduled routes that have to be handled every single day within school to school and all over the state. And we have special routes that picks one up and picks them to one particular place and back. And we have 2 published runs every single morning and every single afternoon of getting kids to and from school. We also have a public transit both in the rural and in the urban. That's the most obvious, but there may be other areas that transportation related. Those are what we're kind of looking at. So I guess I'm throwing it out there. I have to report back to the speaker that we are pursuing some way of contributing to this conversation of school
Cost.
education reform, costs, structure, transportation related. And I'm looking for, thank you very much for somebody jumping in. So,
I feel like you're teeing us up for this. But we discussed a week or 2 ago, the possibility of looking at a pilot project that would look at merging school buses with public transportation. We obviously have funding issues with our public transportation. We know we've got school buses, a lot of them are traveling and they are not filled. Some of them are pretty empty. I did mention this to my superintendent recently, just, what would you think about the idea of trying to merge a school bus and public transportation? He said, my first concern is kids' safety. And I just said, I believe that other countries do this. Like you look at Europe and look at New York City, kids riding the subway to school. So I don't know if there's a fear factor that we can try to address, but I love the idea of trying to engage a particular geographical area, maybe starting with the students, which reminds me that I have some students from my district coming on February 11th who would like to listen in on our transportation committee discussions. And these are high school students, maybe that we could engage them in conversation about this. So I just wanted to tee up that conversation.
thank you very much. Representative Burt, please.
Yeah, I love the idea too, and I do think, I have heard from people expressing concerns about, particularly, certain people riding the bus that might be mentally ill or things like that. I'm wondering about, as they have in other countries, have another person on the bus. For saving money, but you have somebody else who rides along who's sort of a bus monitor, who would be able to address those issues. So, I think we'd have to look at the cost, but I would think that it would probably be cheaper than having, separate buses.
Or even if we could look at some seniors who are leaders at their schools and pay them some small amount to be kind of like leader on the school bus and in charge of making sure everybody gets along and giving them some.
And I know they're having problems having bus drivers, but it might be riding a bus might not be, we don't need a CDL. It might be a whole different kind of a situation.
Representative Powell?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, were you done? We'll keep coming back.
You're all set.
Oh, I'm done.
Okay. So it's something I've been thinking about and talking about for 10 years, I bet. And the safety thing always comes up. But I'm hoping that out of this transportation budget, we empower the AOT, maybe with Ross McDonald, I've talked to him about it, is to maybe the data exists. I don't think it does because it's scattered around 100+ districts. What is the cost per person, per passenger mile for buses, for school busing, in the same way they measure public transportation, just to get that understanding. And it may be different in urban, more dense areas like Chittenden South District, there's a lot of students versus, somewhere in Orleans County. So I think we need to understand what those costs are. And then, start looking at, there are a few places that do it a little bit. So I know that Tri-Valley Transit picks up students and transport them to more private schools or programs that are not exactly with the school, but they need those transportation things. So I mean, I don't think there's anything we can do this year. I can't imagine. But I think if we came back next year with the information and, for the education folks, I've talked to the education committee chair about this. And, obviously they're going to look into what the overall cost is. We'll see. I think it's going to be surprising how much it costs.
Is there an age limit on that, Phil, on Tri-Valley? You said they're sort of experimental.
I think it's high school.
High school, so it's not elementary.
I don't know.
Is it like a formal program or just student, because I'm aware of students who go to private schools who use GMT,
Yes.
but
Yeah,
I don't,
yeah.
that's not, they're only, it's not like the public school option. That I-
No,
okay.
right now, no, but there have been a couple of towns that have tried this in Vermont and obviously around the country, because we're doing this. So, and public transportation, school transportation isn't a right. So we gotta keep that in mind. Public school is a right, you can't take that away, but we provide the transportation as a service, rightfully so, but, I'll just throw that out here. So I think it's something we can certainly dig into as far as education funding.
So this is a kind of more looking ahead of proposal, but we are talking about, we have a significant number of school buildings that are falling apart or PFAS don't have, flood zone. I mean, they're challenges, right? So we're going to be, a part of this will be looking at our school buildings too and rethinking some of that as this gets underway. So there is the Safe Routes to School program, the federal Safe Routes to School program, which helps communities become more walkable and bikeable in the immediate area of school. So I think connecting where we want future schools to sort of hubs where people can already get around, maybe there's employment, you can co-locate a lot of efficient services like daycare, things like that. So it's kind of, one-stop shopping for parents. I think that would be something to also complement this. And just wanted to, throw that out there. That's a very much a long-term way of looking at things. But if we are talking about reforming the entire system, it should, I think there's merit to wrapping in this way of thinking.
Interesting, yes. Representative West.
Yeah, we do some of that stuff in Orleans County already. They have building trades at North Country Union High School. Lake Region does not, so they transfer on their joint buses every day up there and back. They are, somebody mentioned there's a real shortage of bus drivers. There's such a shortage that they're paying them for hours they don't work. You basically have a 10-hour route, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon. So you work 10 hours, they actually pay you for 20 in the Lake Region District. And then as far as costs, you were mentioning, Phil, you got kids coming in from Harwood or your district, a bunch of kids, 7th and 8th graders in Brownington wanted to come down here. They had no money. They sent Sam Douglas and I a message. So we anteed up the reps in Orleans County and we bought a bus. They're going to come down here sometime. It cost us $400 to drive 50 kids down from Brownington, 65 miles down and back, $400. Maybe they gave us a break. I don't know, Phil.
Yeah.
But, and so those are 3 points that we are either doing in our area in a small way or just an example of buses. They're getting paid, the drivers are getting paid 10 hours for not working as an incentive to sign on.
The speaker had written, is there a role for the state to take over school busing or at least negotiating busing contracts for CTEs and BOCESs too? Well, that doesn't mean anything to me, I guess, but Centers for Technology and excellence is what CTE is, right?
And then there's BOCES,
Which is.
it's the model is what they have in New York. And it is a kind of a consortium of schools or maybe districts that could, to get scale, they can buy services and products, but also contract with maybe some specialists that can then work for all the affiliated schools. So there was a bill that we passed last year that sort of started this up in Vermont, just to try to become a little more efficient about some of the things that we're doing, because we just do everything at the district level, and it's very duplicative and costly.
We pay teachers and staff and whatnot to go from school to school on a daily basis, in addition to the students. I bet we must then, if we have these curriculum people and specialists and whatnot, we pay them.
Certain categories of
Drive from one school
people
to the next to do that work.
are doing some of that. Yeah.
Representative Case?
Why wouldn't you use like a Zoom type of? If you want to teach kids in other schools, why wouldn't you use like a Zoom connection, right?
I'd like to hope there probably are in some ways, but I have no idea.
I'm sure they are.
I don't know.
I've been in school a long time, but they rather than drive teachers around from one place to another, just to add on to what you were saying, that's all I would think that closed circuit TV or whatever they use, Zoom or whatever, would be cheaper.
Probably depends on what class, what's science or something like that, or hands-on or tech, or, yeah, it all depends.
That's definitely an education question outside of my, but I would hope that is happening, but I don't know. I'm definitely not the authority to answer that one.
Yeah.
I think we're over to here next and go keep going.
Thanks. A personal point, my sister is a speech pathologist in one particular, and she wrote around to different schools. That's the point. So yes, then I think it depends on what your category is and that type of thing. It bothers me terribly to hear that we would consider the state taking over the any type of busing. I would consider that the bus, I call it the bus from Rutland, why wouldn't we encourage them or find a way for the school districts to ask them to bid on their contracts? Why wouldn't we ask? I mean, schools are not buses. They are teach people. They teach, and they're not transportation companies. I think it's an add-on, just like some others, but it would seem to me as if we would encourage or find a way, at least to pilot a issue where the bus would actually contract with the different school districts to transport their patients. Listen to me. The students, thank you. Oh, God, sometimes anyway. And there's an intrinsic problem there, though, because they've invested in all those yellow buses. And so maybe that's a place where they would offload those and get out of that expense. But anyway, that's a idea that came to mind.
To comment on a couple of those things is that I am not advocating in any way that the state is taking over busing in the entire, we are just trying to explore what role we may or may not be able to play. And I am definitely not advocating that. I do have on my list a thing that says when everybody watches the buses go, and those yellow buses and the other big blue ones that you see for Green Mountain Train. I often wonder, but occasionally wonder, especially when I have to take them on a road trip. Are they really the tool that, here, how long have they been going on for 50 years? Is that really the tool that we should still be using? Is that big, huge, it's kind of an interesting thing that there's been no evolution of school busing.
No seatbelt.
Since I went to school in the previous millennium. It wasn't even in this decade or this century. It wasn't in this millennium when I was in school, but it's still the same exact tool. And yet the world's technologically involved in all kinds of other areas, but not in that big yellow bus. Representative Couch.
A couple comments. One, some school districts contract out their buses. They don't own them, but others do own them. And it would be good in this study, find out what's the best approach, and it might be contracting out. Another piece of this put on my public transportation hat, is where public transportation falls out, particularly in rural areas, is that last mile. So I met with a constituent on Saturday. She takes the bus in from Heinsberg to the hospital. She's a nurse. But she has to get in her car to drive to the bus, about 2 miles away or 2.5 miles away. So, she takes the bus because she's choosing to do that, and there's reasons. But she's already in her car. And, we talked about this topic. She goes, I put my kid on the school bus. And then I get in the car and drive where the school bus is going to the elementary school. So, yeah. So I think that
Is
there's
there a rule
another piece there.
why the staff can't ride the bus? Is there some reason the staff can't ride the bus? Why don't the teachers ride the bus to
I
school?
think they did find there were some problems with it, but I'm not sure what, they explored it in our area
So all
some
good.
years ago.
And that's, I'm trying not to break my own rules. I said we're not solving political question here, but there are great questions around this idea of why we don't do or don't do some of these behaviors. And they do drive, you can't help it, the political question of the very first one, from safety to the very second, of these choices of whatever they are for the environmental aspect of that, or whatever the public good, or whatever term. And I'm breaking my, you gotta hold me up here before I break my own rule. But I'm saying it does amaze me. It just amazes me. How many people come into a high school to work and they're all driving their own car? That kind of amazes me in a way, personal choice, but you want to fill up I would assume it would be the goal of any program to maximize fill up the transport. Whether the bus is outdated and it should be a different tool or not is a whole nother question, but anyway, somebody take it over. Before I say the wrong thing here.
Just going on that, like, imagine if teachers all rode the buses and kids all rode the buses, and we had, seniors who are leaders in the community riding the buses. Like, imagine what kind of sea change that would be in terms of environmentalism, keeping traffic off the
Community.
roads, community.
I'm gonna take it back.
Yeah.
I've always had this crazy idea. If everybody have a fifth grader gets free passes to ski anywhere,
Yeah.
right? Every fifth grader can ski free, like
Yeah.
almost everywhere. Fifth grade might be too young, but you imagine the impact on health, on the need for all of the cluster housing, all of the bike improvements, et cetera. If we gave every fifth grader, let's say a seventh grader, where they're not going to grow anymore. Imagine if we had a program partnered with the bike manufacturers of the world, that every kid in seventh grade got a bicycle. What that town would have to do to improve their bike lanes and improve their safety, and imagine the health increase, and imagine, like in our case, the bike trail, the Loyal Valley Rail Trail goes right past the Swanton School, right next to the high school, and right to the Highgate Elementary. And there's not a kid on there, but imagine if every seventh grader got a bicycle in some private partnership, and what it would do to the effort to improve every sidewalk, every bike lane, every planner's dream to say, hey, you got to fix this because I want my kids to be healthier. And anyway, that's one that I've never mentioned to any of you, but imagine. And that is, by the way, there's only 10,000 kids per class or less now, 8,000 kids that are in seventh grade. You get a partnership with somebody who wanted to be known as the supplier to the entire state. It wouldn't cost, they'd step up. That's nothing for a budget of a bicycle company. But anyway, I would say, imagine, just like free skiing for fifth graders, just like we give out every seventh grader at the high school gets whatever the heck this is.
Yeah.
Every seventh grader gets one of those. That doesn't help them be more active, but boy, interesting thought anyway.
Bicycles
We should all have a.
Bicycle's cheaper and it has more health benefits. Representative Lally, I'm sorry.
I just want to say, I love that idea. I totally love this idea. And I just also want to say that places that we think of as these bicycling meccas, in the world, like, Holland and Copenhagen and a couple of places, they made they became that way very, very intentionally and with a lot of focus and very deliberately, and it took decades. And I think that, we have this, as I was listening to this discussion of safety and the concerns, I'm thinking, we don't know what our kids are doing online, and there's a great deal of concern about that. But within our communities, there are lots of eyes. Vermont is small. Vermont cares about its kids. There's a way to think about this as enhancing safety and community, and in a way that I think we've gotten away from by being so fearful about everything. So, I'm originally from Washington, DC, and, I grew up in the city, walked to school. But my brother took the bus to school. I mean, this was just normal, like that. You didn't have school buses, and we went to private schools. So that was just normal, and this, this was in the 70s, so it was, there was a lively time, So, we all survived. We learned, we learned a lot. And, the public realm there was a lot going on in the public realm, so, and I think, this kind of like approach to cocooning our kids all the time is detrimental. We have mental health crises. We're all aware that that's one of the big drivers. So I think there's a huge amount to be said for, this concept of we are going to, within our communities, encourage our kids to develop a degree of agency and, a sense of self and getting around on their own speed and I love the spike idea. I think it's just great. Sorry.
Yeah, and also a comment, my understanding, again, this study would really help us or get people in that already know the answers. My understanding, none of the public school transportation systems, there's no real federal funding there. That's coming right out of your property tax. Now, occasionally there are grants, federal grants for like an electric bus or things like that. So they do tap competitive grants, but generally all those buses and all those drivers and all that fuel is coming right out of your property tax already. Be nice if it's
Still on buses?
Yeah.
You want buses? I don't know.
No, so we still on buses.
Are we still on? Yeah, I took us in a few different directions. Well, I'm just saying, 5,000 kids were born, only 5,100 babies born in Vermont last year.
Yeah.
You get a sponsorship with a bicycle company, 5,000 kids were only born here last year. In a few years, they're able to ride $100 for a bicycle combined with a sponsorship. Somebody is $500,000. It's a drop in the bucket compared to.
Bikes in winter time?
I don't know, maybe not. I heard they got snow tire. What was that one? But anyway, that's we need to, with climate change, we'll be here warm enough soon.
Yeah.
We'll be able to do it all year round.
I guess,
There was a question over here, a comment from someone else. Sorry, Molly, I'm sorry.
I think I mentioned this
We
one.
gotta go
before.
offline if I'm gonna start talking like that. If I, yes, you're up. I said, if I keep talking the way I am, I need to go offline.
I'm just writing to Jared Duvall at Energy Action Network, because there was a pilot project that I think was funded several years ago through the Energy Action Network conference about using electric bike buses and public transit and school transit. And I don't know what became of it, so I will writing to find out more and I will report back.
Don't all kids have bikes anyway in seventh grade?
No.
What? Not anywhere that I see anymore. I
Okay.
can't remember the last time I saw a bicycle.
They all got a phone.
You're living in our world. Go drive around.
You're right.
Go drive around and see.
we were getting laughed at. They said, yeah, we're.
Yep, I'm not, I'm just, there's the practical reality of what we need to do right now, and which one of these ideas we want to hear more information about, and then there's a certain amount of topics that are just there to stimulate brainstorming.
Oh, that was stimulated. That was similar. We should do that. But my thought, like I said, I have no problems going out with if you want to do a statewide contract, that's feasible for buses. But at the same time, you can't turn a blind eye to the society that we live in. It's just a lot different. You got sex offenders and, you have a lot of things that are out there, whether that's, stuff that's built up, that's the perception out there and it's real. So if we were to go down that road with the technology, there'd have to be something on the bus, maybe not a physical person, but just like a badge.
Yeah.
That if somebody swipe, it's gonna trigger, yes, this is a sex offender, he shouldn't be on this bus. Something like that. I mean, you could work around it, but
Or an
Wow.
approved bus pass.
Or a bus, yeah, something like
To
that.
apply.
But you would have to address that concern and just say, nah, don't worry, it doesn't, you know, that's no big deal. I don't think we're gonna get too far.
No,
But anyways,
we. What else could the state do, or we do, or what could the committee be involved, or what is transportation related that's tied to schools, cost of schools, education reform, property tax costs? That's what we think about. We're okay for our break at this point unless we have a few more comments. That was, sometimes these things can only go for so long, and I really wanted to just throw out ideas. It also gives an opportunity for members to understand to a certain degree how other members think. We've got the kind of overall goal of still pushing the T-bill through and then heading into the T-bill language, and we've got to get that to the finish line. I would be very clear that obviously I've spent a fair amount of time, they're spending a fair amount of time understanding where the money's going to come from in transportation is a big deal where we're headed. That's going to be part of one of our discussions. And understanding what people want to do to help towns based on that huge conversation. This is a separate small piece that we will or won't be able to go down. I wrote 5 or 6, 8 different bullet points of questions that we may or may not want to do. I'll probably share that out with the committee, and somebody's going to have to jump on one of the one, how many that we want to do a little bit more for. And then you can let this kind of percolate and see if more comes back. But I appreciate the willingness to share. And again, committee discussion is a little bit different for us. We haven't done that in the years that I've been here as far as, so I appreciate everybody's respectful interaction, and we're on break until we come back at 3 o'clock with one of the other topics that we're not going to shed during this whole piece is public transit. So the agency will present their budget piece, and then we will have response later in the week and in next week from people that are directly providers and or running, I guess they are providers. So thank you all very much. We're